Jake Morrison stared at his reflection in the men's bathroom mirror, adjusting his tie for the fourth time in 10 minutes. His hands trembled slightly as he practiced the words he'd rehearsed countless times over the past 3 weeks. "Hey, Vanessa, I was wondering if you'd like to grab dinner this Friday." He cleared his throat and tried again, attempting to deepen his voice. "Vanessa, would you be interested in having dinner with me sometime?" Neither version sounded right. Nothing ever sounded right when it came to talking to Vanessa Blake. Jake had been working at Meridian Marketing Solutions for 2 years, and from his first day, Vanessa had captivated him. She was everything he felt he wasn't: confident, articulate, commanding attention wherever she went. Her presentations were flawless, her laugh infectious, and her presence seemed to light up every room she entered. While Jake struggled to contribute meaningfully to meetings, often stumbling over his words or having his suggestions overlooked, Vanessa commanded respect from colleagues and clients alike. At 28, Jake had always been what people politely called average. Average height, average build, average looks. His brown hair had a stubborn cowlick that refused to cooperate despite expensive styling products, and his clothes never seemed to fit quite right, no matter how much he spent or how carefully he shopped. He'd spent most of his adult life feeling invisible, watching more confident men effortlessly attract the women he could only admire from afar. But Vanessa was different. Over the months, Jake had convinced himself he'd caught her smiling at him occasionally, that maybe her brief hellos in the hallway lasted a fraction longer than necessary. He'd analyzed every interaction, searching for signs that his feelings might be reciprocated. When she'd asked to borrow a pen during last week's staff meeting, he'd interpreted it as a positive sign, despite the fact that his desk was simply the closest to hers. Today was the day. He'd given himself an ultimatum: ask Vanessa out or accept that he'd remain forever trapped in his own insecurity. The company was hosting its monthly team lunch, and he'd decided to approach her during the more relaxed atmosphere of the restaurant gathering. Jake splashed cold water on his face and took a deep breath. "You can do this," he whispered to his reflection. "The worst she can say is no." The team had gathered at Russo's, a popular Italian restaurant downtown. Jake arrived fashionably late, hoping to make a better entrance, but instead found himself awkwardly hovering near the hostess stand as his colleagues chatted animatedly at their reserved tables. He spotted Vanessa immediately. She was holding court at the center table, gesturing expressively as she told some story that had everyone laughing. She looked stunning, as always. Her black hair fell in perfect waves over her shoulders, and she wore an emerald green dress that complemented her complexion beautifully. Jake felt his mouth go dry as he approached the group. "Jake," called out his supervisor, Mr. Henderson. "Glad you could make it. We saved you a spot." Jake navigated through the crowded restaurant, acutely aware of how his shirt was already beginning to stick to his back with nervous perspiration. He took the empty chair that thankfully was relatively close to Vanessa's position. Throughout lunch, Jake tried to work up the courage to join the conversation. Several times he opened his mouth to contribute to discussions about weekend plans or funny client stories, but each time someone else jumped in first, or the topic shifted before he could formulate his thoughts. He found himself nodding along, laughing at appropriate moments, but remaining largely invisible, his usual role in group settings. As dessert was served, people began breaking off into smaller conversations. Jake saw his opportunity. Vanessa was momentarily alone, checking something on her phone while others chatted around her. His heart hammering against his ribs, Jake cleared his throat softly. "Hey, Vanessa." She looked up, seeming slightly surprised that he'd addressed her directly. "Oh, hi, Jake. How's your tiramisu?" "It's great, thanks." Jake's prepared speech evaporated from his mind. He fumbled for words, then decided to just jump in. "Actually, I was wondering, would you maybe like to have dinner sometime? Just the two of us, I mean. Like a date." The words hung in the air between them. Jake watched as Vanessa's expression shifted from mild surprise to something he couldn't quite read. Around them, conversations continued, but Jake felt as though the entire restaurant had gone silent. Vanessa set down her phone, slowly a strange smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Are you asking me out, Jake?" "Yes," Jake replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "I mean, if you'd be interested. I know a great little place downtown, or we could go wherever you'd prefer, or—" "Hold on, everyone," Vanessa said, her voice carrying clearly across their section of the restaurant. Conversation stopped as heads turned toward them. Jake felt his stomach drop as he realized she was drawing attention to their interaction. "Jake Morrison just asked me out on a date," Vanessa announced, that strange smile widening. A few people chuckled, unsure whether this was meant to be funny or sweet. Jake's face burned with embarrassment. "Vanessa, I didn't mean for it to be a big announcement." "Oh, but it should be," Vanessa continued, her tone taking on a sharp edge that made Jake's blood run cold. "I mean, look at you. Really look at yourself, Jake." The table had gone completely quiet now. Jake could feel every eye on him, and he wanted nothing more than to disappear into the floor. "You're what, 5'7" on a good day? And that's if you're wearing those shoes with the thick soles." Vanessa's voice carried a cruel amusement that Jake had never heard from her before. "You dress like you shop in the clearance section of a department store that went out of business in 1995. Your hair looks like you stuck your finger in an electrical socket. And don't even get me started on that cologne you wear. It smells like a teenager's gym bag." Jake felt physically sick. Around the table, some people were staring at their plates uncomfortably, while others watched the spectacle with the horrified fascination of witnessing a car accident. "But the really adorable part," Vanessa continued, warming to her theme, "is that you actually thought you had a chance with me. I mean, have you looked in a mirror lately, Jake? Have you considered what I might see in someone like you?" "Vanessa," Mr. Henderson started uncomfortably. "Maybe we should—" "No, let me finish," she said, holding up a perfectly manicured hand. "This is actually educational for poor Jake here. See, Jake, some of us put effort into ourselves. We work out, we dress well, we develop personalities that are actually interesting. We don't just show up to life expecting people to overlook our obvious shortcomings out of pity." Jake's vision blurred with humiliation and hurt. He could barely process what was happening. This was Vanessa, the woman he'd idealized, the person he'd convinced himself might actually care about him. "The truth is, Jake, you're exactly the kind of guy that women settle for when they've given up on finding someone actually worth their time. You're the consolation prize. Well, at least he's nice option." Her laugh was like glass breaking. "Did you really think I was going to say yes? Did you actually believe that months of hovering around my desk and stammering through basics conversations had somehow won me over?" Jake stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. His hands were shaking, and he could feel tears threatening to spill over. The entire restaurant seemed to be staring at their table now, drawn by the commotion. I'm sorry," he managed to whisper. "I didn't mean to. I'm sorry." He turned and walked quickly toward the exit, leaving his jacket and dignity behind. Behind him, he could hear Vanessa's voice, though he couldn't make out the words over the rushing sound in his ears. The cool autumn air hit him like a slap as he pushed through the restaurant's front door. Jake walked aimlessly down the sidewalk, his mind reeling. Every word Vanessa had said echoed in his head, each observation about his appearance and inadequacies hitting him with fresh waves of shame. She was right, wasn't she? He was exactly what she'd described. Average, forgettable, the kind of person people overlooked without a second thought. How had he been so delusional to think someone like Vanessa Blake would ever be interested in someone like him? Jake found himself at a bus stop several blocks from the restaurant, finally allowing the tears to come. A few passers-by glanced at him curiously, but most people hurried past without acknowledgement. just as they always had, just as Vanessa had pointed out they always would. His phone buzzed with text messages, probably colleagues checking on him or discussing what they'd witnessed. Jake couldn't bear to look. Instead, he sat on the cold metal bench and replayed every moment of the disaster, each detail more mortifying than the last. The worst part wasn't even the public humiliation, devastating as that had been. The worst part was the growing realization that Vanessa had simply said out loud what everyone already thought about him. His coworkers' uncomfortable silence hadn't been sympathy. It had been recognition of truths they'd all observed but been too polite to voice. As the afternoon wore on and office workers began their evening commutes, Jake remained on that bench, watching the world go by. For the first time in his adult life, he found himself seriously considering what it would take to become the kind of person who didn't inspire the kind of cruelty he'd just experienced. Maybe it was time to stop being Jake Morrison, the invisible average man who asked for humiliation by reaching beyond his station. Maybe it was time to become someone else entirely, someone who would never again be dismissed so casually, so cruelly. But first, he had to figure out how to face tomorrow and the next day and all the days after that, knowing that everyone in his office had witnessed his complete and total destruction at the hands of the woman he'd foolishly believed might actually care about him. The sun was setting by the time Jake finally stood up from the bench, his body stiff from sitting motionless for hours. He had no idea what he was going to do next, but he knew with absolute certainty that he couldn't continue being the person he'd been that morning, the person who had walked into Russo's with hope and walked out with nothing but the bitter taste of his own inadequacy. Jake didn't return to work for 3 days. He called in sick, which wasn't entirely a lie. The humiliation had left him physically nauseous and unable to sleep. He spent those days in his cramped studio apartment, alternating between staring at the ceiling and researching extreme makeover procedures online. By Thursday evening, he'd bookmarked 17 different cosmetic surgery websites and drafted emails to 3 personal trainers who specialized in complete body transformations. His best friend and former college roommate, Tommy Chen, had been texting him relentlessly since Tuesday, but Jake ignored every message. He'd also received a handful of awkward texts from coworkers, generic, "hope you're feeling better," messages that felt more like obligations than genuine concern. Mr. Henderson had called once, leaving a voicemail about taking all the time he needed, which somehow made everything worse. Jake was researching hair transplant procedures when someone knocked on his door Thursday night. He ignored it, assuming it was Tommy making one of his periodic welfare checks. The knocking persisted, followed by a voice he didn't recognize. "Jake, my name is Diana Blake. I really need to talk to you." Blake. Jake's stomach lurched. Had Vanessa sent someone to deliver a final humiliation? He considered pretending he wasn't home, but something in the voice, younger, softer than Vanessa's, made him reconsider. "I'm Vanessa's sister," the voice continued. "Please, I know you probably don't want to see anyone right now, but I need to apologize for what she did. It's important." Against his better judgment, Jake opened the door. The woman standing in his hallway looked like a younger, gentler version of Vanessa. She had the same dark hair and striking features, but where Vanessa carried herself with sharp confidence, this woman seemed almost hesitant. "I'm Diana," she said, extending her hand. "May I come in? I promise I'm not here to make things worse." Jake stepped aside wordlessly, suddenly conscious of his rumpled clothes and unshaven face. Diana entered and glanced around his apartment, not judgmentally, but with what seemed like genuine concern. "I heard about what happened at the restaurant," she said, settling onto his small couch. "Actually, everyone's heard about it. It's all over social media." Jake's heart sank further. Social media? Someone recorded it. Posted it on Instagram with some caption about entitled men getting what they deserve. Diana's expression darkened. It's gotten thousands of views. I'm so sorry, Jake. That's actually why I'm here. Jake sank into his desk chair, feeling like he might vomit. Thousands of people have seen. I had the video taken down, Diana said quickly. I reported it, contacted the person who posted it, made some threats about privacy laws. It's gone now, but... She paused, looking genuinely pained. I can't undo the damage that's already been done. They sat in silence for a moment. Jake stared at his hands, trying to process that his humiliation had been entertainment for strangers across the internet. Why are you here? He finally asked. Why would you help me? Diana leaned forward, her expression earnest. Because what my sister did was unconscionable, because you deserve to know the truth about why she acted that way, and because... She hesitated. Because I've been watching Vanessa destroy people for years and I can't stay silent anymore. The truth? Jake looked up. The truth is that she was right about everything. I am exactly what she said I am. No, Diana said firmly. You're not. And neither is she what she pretends to be. Over the next hour, Diana painted a picture of her sister that Jake had never imagined. Vanessa, she explained, had been the overweight, awkward middle child who'd endured years of bullying in high school. She'd transformed herself through obsessive dieting and exercise, but the insecurity had never left. She sees her old self in people like you, Diana explained. People who are genuine, who haven't learned to put on masks and play social games. It terrifies her because it reminds her of who she used to be. So she attacks first, before anyone can hurt her the way she was hurt. That doesn't excuse what she did, Jake said. You're absolutely right. It doesn't. Diana's voice was firm. What she did was cruel and unforgivable, but I wanted you to understand that it wasn't about you, not really. It was about her own demons. Diana went on to describe Vanessa's pattern of relationships. Men who looked perfect on paper but treated her poorly, her constant anxiety about maintaining her image, her increasing reliance on prescription medications to manage stress and weight. She's miserable, Jake. Has been for years. She just hides it better than most people. Why are you telling me this? Jake asked. Why betray your own sister? Diana was quiet for a long moment. Because I'm a psychology graduate student and I've spent 2 years studying the long-term effects of bullying and public humiliation. Because I've watched what this kind of trauma does to people. And because... She met his eyes. Because you seem like a genuinely good person who got caught in the crossfire of someone else's damage. They talked until nearly midnight. Diana shared stories from her psychology classes explaining concepts like projection and displacement. She talked about her own struggles with anxiety and her decision to go into therapy herself after watching her family's dysfunction for years. What are you going to do now? She asked as she prepared to leave. Jake shrugged. I've been looking into some changes, surgery maybe, personal trainers. I figured if I'm going to get rejected, I might as well make them work harder for it. Diana stopped putting on her coat. Jake, can I ask you something? Before this happened, were you happy with yourself? The question caught him off guard. I don't know. I guess I never really thought about it. Because here's what I've learned. In my studies, changing yourself to avoid rejection doesn't work. It just shifts the source of your insecurity. You'll never be enough for people like Vanessa because people like Vanessa don't know how to be happy with themselves. She handed him a business card. This is my therapist. She's wonderful, and she specializes in helping people recover from public humiliation and social trauma. Will you at least consider it? After Diana left, Jake stared at the card for a long time. Dr. Patricia Reeves, licensed clinical psychologist. He'd never considered therapy before. It seemed like something for people with real problems, not just everyday inadequacy. But as he replayed his conversation with Diana, something shifted in his thinking. For the first time since the restaurant incident, he found himself wondering not how to become someone else, but how to become more authentically himself. The next morning, Jake called Dr. Reeves. His first therapy session was awkward and uncomfortable. Dr. Reeves was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a direct manner that reminded him of his favorite college professor. She didn't try to make him feel better about what had happened, but she helped him understand why it had affected him so deeply. "You've been living your life seeking external validation," she explained during their third session. "Your sense of self-worth has been entirely dependent on other people's approval. That's why Vanessa's rejection felt so devastating, because you'd given her the power to define your value as a person." Slowly, Jake began to understand the difference between changing himself to avoid rejection and changing himself for his own growth and happiness. Dr. Reeves introduced him to concepts he'd never considered: self-compassion, intrinsic motivation, authentic confidence versus performative confidence. "Tell me about the things you enjoy," she said during one session. "Not things you think you should enjoy or things that might impress other people. What genuinely brings you joy?" It was harder than Jake expected to answer. He realized he'd spent so much time trying to be what he thought others wanted that he'd lost touch with his own preferences and interests. Through weekly sessions, Jake began to rediscover parts of himself he'd forgotten. He remembered his love of photography from college, his enjoyment of cooking elaborate meals for himself, his fascination with documentaries about space exploration. Small things, but they belonged to him. Diana had also introduced him to her. Gym, not one of the intimidating bodybuilder warehouses he'd researched online, but a community center with a swimming pool and group fitness classes. She'd offered to be his workout partner, and somewhat to his surprise, Jake found he enjoyed her company. "I'm not trying to replace what my sister destroyed," Diana told him one evening as they walked home from a yoga class. I like spending time with you. You're thoughtful and funny, and you actually listen when people talk." That's rarer than you might think. Jake found himself looking forward to their sessions together. Diana was pursuing her master's degree in clinical psychology, and their conversations ranged from her research to his photography to their shared love of obscure science fiction films. She laughed at his jokes, genuinely laughed, not the polite chuckles he was used to receiving. "Can I ask you something?" Jake said one evening as they shared coffee after their workout. "Why are you spending time with me? I mean, really, you could be with anyone." Diana smiled. "Because you asked me about my thesis research and actually cared about the answer. Because you remember that I don't like mushrooms on pizza. Because when you tell stories, you focus on what other people were feeling, not just what happened to you." She paused. "Because you're kind without expecting anything in return. That's not as common as it should be." Over the months that followed, Jake slowly built a new version of himself. Not the dramatic transformation he'd initially envisioned, but something deeper and more sustainable. He started running, not to punish his body, but because he enjoyed the meditative quality of long runs through the city. He upgraded his wardrobe, choosing clothes that fit properly and reflected his actual personality, rather than what he thought would impress others. Most importantly, he learned to value his own opinion of himself above others' judgments. It wasn't easy. The work of rebuilding self-esteem never is. But Dr. Reeves helped him develop tools for managing his inner critic and recognizing his own worth. Tommy, who had finally managed to corner Jake for a conversation, was amazed by the changes he saw in his friend. "It's not that you look that different," Tommy said over beers one Friday night. "I mean, you do look good, healthier, more put together. But it's more like you're actually present now. Like you're not constantly worried about what everyone else is thinking." Jake smiled. "I guess I'm finally learning to like myself. Turns out that makes everything else easier." As winter turned to spring, Jake realized he was genuinely happy for the first time in years. He'd returned to work, weathered the awkward conversations and curious stares, and gradually rebuilt his professional reputation through solid work and quiet confidence. Some colleagues had apologized for their silence during the restaurant incident. Others pretended it had never happened. Jake found he didn't need their validation either way, but the biggest change was in his relationship with Diana. What had started as her attempt to make amends for her sister's cruelty had grown into something neither of them had expected. They spent most weekends together now, exploring the city, trying new restaurants, attending photography exhibitions that Jake had started entering. "I need to tell you something," Diana said one evening as they sat on Jake's couch, now decorated, with his own photographs and books about subjects that genuinely interested him. Jake looked up from the documentary they'd been watching. "What's that?" "I'm falling in love with you," she said simply. "And not because I feel guilty about Vanessa, or because I'm trying to fix what she broke. Because of who you are, who you've always been underneath all that self-doubt." Jake felt his heart skip, but not with the desperate anxiety that had characterized his feelings for Vanessa. This was something warmer, more solid. "I love you too," he said, realizing as he spoke that it was true in a way his obsession with Vanessa had never been. "But are you sure you're ready for people to think you're settling for the consolation prize?" Diana laughed and moved closer, to him on the couch. "Jake Morrison, you are nobody's consolation prize. You're the whole damn jackpot, and it took me watching you become yourself to realize it." As spring blossomed into early summer, Jake prepared for the ultimate test of his transformation. The company's annual summer party was approaching, and for the first time since the restaurant incident, he would be in the same room as Vanessa Blake. He wasn't the same man who had asked her out in desperate hope of external validation. The question now was, who had she become in the months since she'd destroyed him so publicly? And more importantly, would the new Jake Morrison be strong enough to face her without losing the peace he'd worked so hard to build? The Meridian Marketing Solutions annual summer party was held at the rooftop terrace of the downtown Marriott, with panoramic views of the city skyline and an open bar that encouraged networking and socializing. Jake arrived fashionably on time, not early enough to seem desperate, not late enough to make an entrance. He wore a navy blazer that fit perfectly, having learned to invest in quality basics, and carried himself with the quiet confidence he'd developed over the past 6 months. Diana squeezed his hand as they stepped off the elevator. "You sure you're ready for this?" Jake smiled, feeling calmer than he'd expected. "Actually, yeah, I think I am." The transformation wasn't dramatic in the way Jake had originally envisioned. He hadn't gained 30 pounds of muscle or undergone cosmetic surgery. Instead, he'd learned to stand up straight, to make eye contact when he spoke, to dress in clothes that fit his actual body rather than hiding it. Most importantly, he'd learned to value his own opinion above the judgments of others. "Jake," Mr. Henderson approached them with a genuine smile. "Great to see you. And you must be Diana. Jake's told us so much about you." Jake had mentioned Diana to a few close colleagues, explaining that she was a psychology graduate student he'd been seeing. He'd been honest about their relationship without providing unnecessary details about how they'd met. "It's nice to meet you, Mr. Henderson," Diana replied warmly. "Jake speaks very highly of everyone here." As they mingled through the party, Jake was struck by how differently people responded to him. It wasn't that his colleagues were suddenly fascinated by his conversation. He was still the same person with the same interests and sense of humor. But there was something about his increased confidence that made people more likely to engage with him, to actually listen when he spoke. "Morrison!" called out Dave from accounting, a guy Jake had barely spoken to in 2 years. "I heard you got some photographs accepted into that gallery downtown. That's fantastic." Jake felt a flush of pride. His photography had indeed started, gaining recognition, with 3 pieces currently displayed in a local art cooperative. "Thanks, Dave. It's been a great creative outlet. You'll have to show me your work sometime. I've been thinking about taking up photography myself." 6 months. Ago, Jake would have assumed Dave was just being polite. Now, he recognized genuine interest and found himself easily chatting about camera equipment and composition techniques. Diana watched these interactions with quiet satisfaction. "You see how different you are?" she murmured during a quiet moment. "People are drawn to confidence, even quiet confidence. You're not performing anymore, you're just being yourself." Jake was deep in conversation with Rebecca Martinez, a new hire in the creative department who joined the company 3 months earlier, when he spotted Vanessa across the terrace. She looked different, thinner than before, and there was something brittle about her laughter as she talked to a group near the bar. Her dress was expensive and perfectly tailored, her makeup flawless, but something seemed off. She kept checking her phone and glancing around the party as if looking for someone or something. "Is that her?" Diana asked quietly, following Jake's gaze. "Yeah, that's Vanessa." Jake felt nothing. No spike of anxiety, no rush of attraction, no remnant of the infatuation that had once consumed him. Looking at Vanessa now, he saw what Diana had tried to explain months earlier. Someone performing happiness rather than living it. "She looks lonely," Diana observed. "Yeah," Jake agreed. "She does." Rebecca, who had been telling Jake about a documentary photography project she was working on, noticed their distraction. "Everything okay?" "Fine," Jake said, returning his attention to her. "You were saying about the lighting challenges in urban environments?" As the evening progressed, Jake found himself genuinely enjoying the party. He and Diana mingled easily, with Jake introducing her to colleagues and Diana charming everyone with her intelligence and warmth. Several people commented on how happy Jake seemed, how good it was to see him so confident. It was nearly 10 o'clock when Vanessa finally approached him. Jake was standing near the terrace railing with Diana and Tommy, who'd arrived fashionably late when he saw her walking toward them. Her steps were slightly unsteady, not dramatically drunk, but definitely affected by the open bar. "Jake," she said, her voice carrying the same commanding tone he remembered, but with an edge of something else. Desperation, maybe. "I was hoping I'd get a chance to talk to you tonight." Diana tensed slightly beside him, but Jake remained relaxed. "Hello, Vanessa. How are you?" "I'm—" She paused, seeming to study his face. "You look different." "Good. Different. Really good. Thank you," Jake replied simply. There was an awkward silence. Tommy and Diana exchanged glances, clearly prepared to intervene if necessary, but Jake seemed completely at ease. "I was wondering," Vanessa continued, stepping closer, "if you'd like to dance. They've got a great DJ, and I thought maybe we could talk." Jake felt Diana's surprise more than saw it. This was clearly not what anyone had expected. "I appreciate the offer," Jake said gently, "but I'm here with Diana tonight." He slipped his arm around Diana's waist naturally. "Vanessa, this is my girlfriend Diana." Diana. "Diana, this is Vanessa Blake from our marketing team." The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. Diana extended her hand politely. "It's nice to meet you, Vanessa." Vanessa stared at Diana for a long moment, clearly recognizing the family resemblance, but not immediately making the connection. Do I know you from somewhere?" "We've never been formally introduced," Diana replied diplomatically. Jake watched the recognition dawn on Vanessa's face. Her expression shifted from confusion to embarrassment to something approaching anger. "You're kidding me," she said, her voice getting louder. "You're dating my sister, my little sister?" "I'm dating Diana," Jake corrected calmly. "The fact that you're related is just coincidence." "Coincidence?" Vanessa's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Oh, this is rich. This is really rich. What did she tell you, Jake? What sob story did she feed you about poor, mean Vanessa?" Diana stepped forward slightly. "Vanessa, please don't do this here." "Don't do what?" "Tell the truth. Tell Jake that." You've probably been planning this little revenge fantasy since you were 15? Vanessa's voice was carrying now, drawing attention from nearby conversations. Jake felt the familiar tightness in his chest that had once signaled panic, but instead of spiraling, he found himself thinking clearly. This was exactly what Dr. E. Reeves had prepared him for, the test of his new sense of self. "Vanessa," he said, his voice calm but firm, "I think you should probably head home. You've had a lot to drink, and you're going to regret this conversation tomorrow. Don't you dare patronize me," she snapped. "Don't you dare stand there acting like you're better than me now just because you've lost a few pounds and bought some new clothes." "I'm not better than you," Jake replied honestly. "I'm just better than I was. And I'm not interested in relitigating. What happened 6 months ago?" "Oh, you're not interested?" Vanessa's voice dripped with sarcasm. "How very evolved of you. Tell me, Jake, does my sister know about your little obsession with me? Does she know you spent months mooning around my desk like a lost puppy?" Jake felt Diana tense beside him, but he remained calm. "She knows everything, Vanessa. About my feelings for you, about what happened at the restaurant, about why you acted the way you did. We don't keep secrets from each other." This seemed to deflate some of Vanessa's anger. She looked between Jake and Diana, something like confusion replacing the hostility in her expression. "I don't understand," she said, her voice smaller now. "Why would you want to be with her? She's not like us. She doesn't understand how the world really works." "You're right," Jake said. "Diana's not like us. She's better. She's kind, without expecting anything in return. She's confident without needing to tear other people down. She sees the best in people instead of looking for their weaknesses." Diana squeezed his hand, but Jake wasn't finished. "6 months ago, you told me I was the kind of guy women settle for," he continued. "That I was the consolation prize. You know what I learned? You were talking about yourself. You've spent so much time trying to be what you think other people want that you've forgotten who you actually are. And that's sad, Vanessa. It's really sad." Vanessa stared at him for a long moment, her perfectly applied makeup unable to hide the pain in her eyes. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Maybe not," Jake agreed. "But I know I'm happy now. Really happy, for the first time in years. And I hope someday you figure out how to be happy too." Vanessa looked like she wanted to say something else. Something cruel. Something cutting that would restore the power dynamic she was used to controlling. But Jake's genuine compassion seemed to disarm her completely. Instead, she turned and walked away, her high heels clicking against the terrace floor as she disappeared into the crowd. Tommy let out a low whistle. "Damn, Jake. That was impressive." "You okay?" Diana asked, searching his face for signs of distress. Jake considered the question seriously. He'd just faced down the woman who had publicly humiliated him, the woman whose approval he'd once desperately craved. Instead of anxiety or anger, he felt something unexpected. Pity. "Yeah," he said, pulling Diana closer. "I'm really okay." As the party wound down, Jake and Diana found themselves back at the terrace railing, looking out over the city lights. The summer air was warm and comfortable, and Jake felt a deep sense of contentment he'd never experienced before. "Can I tell you something?" Diana said, leaning against his shoulder. "Always. When I first came to apologize to you, I had no idea it would lead to this. I thought I was just trying to undo some of the damage Vanessa had caused. I never expected to find—" "What?" Jake prompted gently. "Someone who would make me want to be better too," she finished. "You've taught me as much about confidence and authenticity as any psychology textbook ever did." Jake laughed softly. "So we're both consolation prizes who turned out to be jackpots?" Something like that. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the city bustle below them. Jake thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment, the humiliation that had nearly destroyed him. the slow work of rebuilding himself from the inside out, the unexpected love that had grown from the ashes of his worst experience. "Do you think Vanessa will be okay?" Diana asked. Eventually, Jake considered this. "I hope so, but she has to want to change, and she has to do the work herself. No one can do it for her." "Very wise, Dr. Morrison," Diana teased. "I learn from the best," Jake replied, kissing the top of her head. Rebecca Martinez approached them as they prepared to leave, looking slightly nervous. "Jake, I hope this isn't inappropriate, but I wanted to ask, would you be interested in collaborating on a photography project? I've been following your work online, and I think our styles would complement each other really well." Jake felt a familiar flutter of excitement, not anxiety this time, but genuine enthusiasm for creative collaboration. "I'd love to hear more about it. Can we set up a time to talk next week?" "Absolutely. I'll email you some ideas." As Rebecca walked away, Diana smiled up at Jake. "Look at you, being sought out for your talent and expertise. How does it feel?" "Honestly, it feels normal," Jake replied. "Like this is who I was always supposed to be." They rode the elevator down in comfortable silence, Jake's arm around Diana's shoulders. As they stepped out into the warm summer night, Jake reflected on how dramatically his life had changed in less than a year. He was still the same person who loved photography and documentaries about space exploration. He still preferred small gatherings to large parties, still felt more comfortable listening than talking in group conversations. But he no longer apologized for taking up space in the world. He no longer sought external validation for his worth as a human being. Most importantly, he'd learned the difference between loving someone who might love him back and loving someone who actually did. Someone who saw his value clearly and chose him not as a consolation prize, but as a conscious, enthusiastic choice. "Thank you," he said to Diana as they walked toward the parking garage. "For what?" "For seeing who I could become before I could see it myself. For showing me that transformation isn't about becoming someone else. It's about becoming more authentically yourself." Diana stopped walking and turned to face him. "Jake Morrison, you did all the hard work. I just gave you a reason to believe it was worth doing." As they drove home through the quiet city streets, Jake felt a deep sense of completion. Not the desperate completion of external validation, but the quiet satisfaction of someone who had faced his fears, done the difficult work of growth, and emerged stronger and more authentic than before. He thought briefly about Vanessa, hoping she would find her own path to healing and self-acceptance. But mostly he thought about the future, the photography projects he wanted to pursue, the places he wanted to travel with Diana, the continued work of becoming the best version of himself. 6 months ago, he'd been a man so desperate for approval that he'd asked out a woman who fundamentally didn't respect him. Tonight, he was a man secure enough in his own worth to offer genuine compassion to someone who had tried to destroy him. That, Jake realized, was what real transformation looked like. Not a dramatic physical makeover or personality overhaul, but the quiet confidence that came from knowing who you were and liking that person enough to stop apologizing for existing. As they pulled into Diana's apartment building, she turned to him with a smile. "So, Mr. Morrison, what's next for us?" Jake considered the question, feeling none of the anxiety that used to accompany thoughts about the future. "Whatever we want it to be," he said simply. "We've got all the time in the world to figure it out." And, for the first time in his adult life, Jake Morrison truly believed that was enough. The end.